Hello everybody and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about two of the most important Power PC Macs, the late MDD Power Mac G4s. So why they are so relevant? Well, they were the last machines, besides the mid-2003 re-release of the MDD, that could boot macOS 9 natively. Therefore, they are the fastest macOS 9 capable machines available, period. They come with their share of problems though. First of all, connectivity options are not that great in terms of ports. Secondly, they are extremely loud. They became famous for being the successors to the Windtunnel G4s, the Quicksilvers, and they didn't get much better in the regard. And there are many reasons behind that. Apple was not always behind the curve in terms of clock speed. The first machine to ever reach 300 MHz, Mac or PC, was actually the Power Macintosh 6500, running at 300 MHz. I happen to own this machine, but it sits 10,000 kilometers from here, so I cannot do any work on it right now. And I think it needs a new power supply. But then, as time goes, during the G4 era, Motorola was struggling to catch up in clock. Intel was applying massive economies of scale to its chip manufacturing and could reach higher and higher clock speeds. At the time, we had what is called the Megahertz War, and the whole advertisement was around how high the clock speeds of your products were. For example, AMD also lost this battle and started advertising the Athlons with, the clock speed plus a performance rating number, like a 2.4 gigahertz Athlon would have a PR of 3400 plus. But Apple lost the war much earlier and always advertised the G4s as being faster, even though they are slower, and even starting adding second processors to the machines during the early G4 era to compensate for the lack of, raw speed. The problem is, the first G4s, the 350 MHz, 400 MHz ones with PCI only, the TDP of the processors was around, if I'm not mistaken, between 10 and 15 watts, and later on they were pushing 60, 70 watts, if I'm not mistaken, even more. But Apple kept the same case design, making cooling a nightmare. And they also didn't invest much. As a consequence, the machines became extremely loud. If you've ever seen a dual processor PC motherboard, you know that the CPUs are far apart. Here we have my Dual 867, and the two CPUs are underneath this very small space sharing the same heatsink. The heatsink is aluminum. It's not as efficient as copper. Copper once came up at the FireWire 800 G4s. So there's a lot of heat generated in this small place. And since Apple never changed the enclosure, the components became very tightly packed. If I close the computer, you see that, let me move the camera a bit, you basically have no clearance between the top of the heatsink and the hard drive cage. And I'm not sure I can show in camera, but the fan itself doesn't align with the heatsink. So let me try again. So there's not much air flowing. Can you see here? There's not much air flowing through more than half of the heatsink, which means also, this whole part, top half of the heatsink here doesn't see any airflow at all. The power consumption increased a lot, but Apple still kept the same case. So they started using the same power supply as the X-Server G4. It pushes a lot of air through a very narrow space, so it is very noisy. People went to crazy extents to cool down and silence their G4s. Apple issued a program to replace the power supply. Some people built massive quiet fan arrays and even a huge passive cooling tower that sits externally to the G4. But a German company called Verax tackled the problem in the most creative way by recreating the whole cooling system of the G4 and creating this beautiful fan set, totally dampened, and also redesigning the heatsink and also replacing the power supply fans with a slower set. It doesn't push as much air, but it's much quieter and it still cools the machine enough. Part of the modification also includes removing the optical drive fans. Optical drives are rarely used nowadays, and I think even during its heyday, I'm not even sure they were completely necessary, and probably it was a more of a CYA exercise by Apple. This G4 is a very special machine. I'm sure the owner used it as his main machine for a long time, because it has been upgraded with a boot drive of 120 gigs SSD, a secondary drive 240 gigs SSD. Both together are probably worth more than the machine. As discussed, the fans were replaced. Oh, and note that it covers also the RAM slots. The owner installed also two very rare cards, a USB 2 card and a FireWire 400 card, and both include a very rare internal connector. So if you want to install an internal FireWire drive, as Apple thought would be the trend, and or if, for example, you want to have a faster wireless, you can install an internal wireless G dongle, for example, and just wire the antenna to the chassis, and you don't need to have something ugly looking outside. You could even potentially leverage the original antenna and just attach it to the new card and have a totally clean wireless G solution. Compared to the other G4, we also have a dual 1.25 with 2 megabytes of L3 cache and better card. Instead of being a GeForce 4, it is a Radeon 9000 Pro. Another problem with the designs of the era is that Apple always kept the PowerPCs very cache starved. The PowerPC suffers more with lack of data than the Intel solutions of the time. So when Apple kept those machines really with 1 or 2 megas of cache, we didn't get the performance we came to expect from PowerPC in general. If you remember well, PowerBook G4 Pismo had a meg of cache. The first 17-inch PowerBook G4 had 1 meg of L3 cache, and but still was not enough. If you remember well, the PCs of the time had 256 or 512Ks of cache at most. And this problem remained until the G5 era. The G5 was a fantastic machine, as we are gonna see in my next video with benchmarks. But still, the comparable solutions by IBM, the IBM workstations at the time, had 1.5 or 2 megs of L2 cache and 36 megs of L3 cache. My IntelliStation 285 Power 5 has 36 megs of cache, just to be sure that we keep the processor always full of data. And how loud were the MDDs? Well, I don't think they were as loud as the Quicksilvers, but the characteristic of the noise is very annoying. The interference between the frequency of the main chassis fan and the power supply fan makes it for a horrible computing experience. You get annoyed really fast, and it's such a relief when you switch the machine off at the end of the day that I use this one wearing noise cancelling headphones, otherwise it's just unbearable. So how loud are they really? Well, let's give it a shot. Let's start by running the 867 MHz without Verax Fans. My phone's dB Pro meter then shows, of course when I'm not speaking, 40 dB. Now let's get a shot of the 1.25 GHz dual with the Verax Fans. Much better. Now the CD-ROM drive is still spinning. I think I have my macOS CD inside. So I'm just gonna wait until it slows down and then capture the noise levels. Oh, it's booting from the CD. Arr. I don't really know why the CD doesn't want to spin down. But you can hear already that this G4 sounds much lower. The frequencies are less clashing, and if you hide it under your table, you probably would not even hear it's there. Whereas the other G4 has this interference clipping sound that gets annoying really fast. This machine I can keep on for a long time, and as soon as I can figure out why it doesn't boot macOS 9 like the other one, for the Nintendo discs it's only working via FireWire. It's gonna be my main macOS 9 machine for my old games, and I intend to keep it. And I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with the other one now. I was planning to give it to a friend, but it's not fast enough for what we were hoping for. And I think I will just order a first generation Mac Pro from the eBay, since my friend doesn't really care about the architecture. He just wants to, get his applications running. So let's see. Thanks for watching and see you next time.